Hello, welcome to Ken Preston-Mafham's South America Travel Diary. This covers a 2017-18 trip of 22 weeks through 5 countries. The total content lasts more than 2 hours, so for those not addicted to binge viewing, this has been split into 3 sections. Firstly, Uruguay, Paraguay and northern Argentina, secondly Bolivia, and lastly Colombia. Some of you might recognise my name from having seen some of these books. However, what follows is not a wildlife documentary, but a general travel diary. There is some natural history content, especially in the section on Colombia. If you're curious about the songs that accompany some of the video, these were written by me and recorded by an ad hoc band that I call the Prop House Casuals. You can hear more songs on Spotify or by purchasing these CDs from the bank's Facebook page. I hope you enjoy what follows. Terminal 1, Heathrow Airport, London. That flight to Bogota is the one I'm heading for. There's a 13-hour layover in Bogota Airport, which I'm not looking forward to, but after that there's an onward flight to Montevideo, Uruguay. When I arrived in Uruguay, in Montevideo, all the hotels were full. There was some kind of festival going on, and this place, the Babylonia, was the only place I could get into, but it turned out to be really nice. There's a self-catering kitchen, which we'll have a quick look at now. There you go. But if you don't want to cater yourself, breakfast is available for an extra payment. And delicious it was too. For the first few weeks in Uruguay, I spent a lot of my time looking at cacti, one of my great wildlife interests, helped by a couple of local Uruguayans. This is the view from the Cerro Montevideo, looking down across the city. These are 2 of my helpers. On the right there's Ruben and his girlfriend, and we were quite lucky because the cacti were beautifully in flower when we arrived. This particular one only occurs on a few hills in southern Uruguay. We then travelled up north. Here and there the roads are still dirt and you have to wait for the grader to come along before you can proceed any further. Quite often the cacti grow on private farms and you have to just drive up and ask for permission and hope for the best. But this farmer was really helpful. He readily granted access to his land and even suggested more or less where we could look for the plant we were after. We had to go down the river, or the stream at least, and then up the top of these cliffs where I spotted a splash of pink in the distance that could have been the plant in flower. There it is. Beautiful pink flowers. And this was the first of several, perhaps 30 or 40. There was also a yellow flower cactus belonging to a different species. Back in Montevideo, a springtime gale was whipping up the waters of the River Plate. A brief view of the city itself, a mix of old and new. And the old part of Montevideo, which is where I'm staying, is full of superb street art. This is just a tiny selection of the hundreds on view. There are beaches within the city, but most Uruguayans go further along where it's much more pleasant than in the city. And this is one of the main roads that runs along the edge of the city. The footpath along the river there on the left is called the Rambla, a very well known area for walkers and for cyclists. There's a trend at the moment in Montevideo to use English for certain shops. I've no idea what the locals make of these names, and they can be rather mysterious, such as this one. What on earth does this shop sell? Rather disappointingly, it turned out to be just women's clothes. But there were the tits on the wall just round the corner, surprisingly enough. Most visitors to Montevideo, at some point or another, will visit the Mercado del Puerto, a favourite place for having an indoor barbecue. Hiring an orange bike is a good way of getting around the city, which is fairly flat. Friday night is also barbecue night, back at the hostel at Babylonia.
Vamos! Vamos! Vamos!
Next day, on a Saturday, I took the local bus up to the main bus terminal to head out towards Argentina and Paraguay on the next part of my trip. This is the usual very modern bus terminal that you find in most South American countries these days. And a quick flip now to Concordia, a town in Argentina not far from the border, heading towards Iguazu to see the massive waterfalls. Here comes my bus, Crucero del Norte. After a 12-hour bus journey, it's nice to stretch my legs in Puerto Iguazu. Here we are at Three Countries Point. I'm standing in Argentina. Across the river there, that's Brazil. And across the river over there, that's Paraguay. Next day, after a bit of a rest, it's time to buy a bus ticket to the waterfalls of Iguazu themselves. big tegu lizards are completely unfazed by all the people walking past. The falls lie in beautiful rainforest where coatimundis are abundant and can be a little bit too tame. The international bus to Paraguay crosses the river and goes through Brazil and through the Brazilian town of Foz do Iguaçu without stopping. It's actually in transit, so all these people are actually heading for Paraguay. Once through Paraguayan immigration, I took a direct bus to Asunción, the capital. Everything was going fine at first. And then this happened, a puncture. Fortunately, all the different bus companies help each other out, and bus after bus stopped and took on as many passengers as they could squeeze in, so eventually I got picked up too and arrived at the bus station in Asunción. A 15-minute taxi ride took me to the Nómada backpacker hostel, run by a very friendly Frenchman. I was met by Gaia, a volunteer from Denmark. Later that evening, she was sitting writing up her diary notes, which she does every day. Next day, she was washing the fridge, another of her daily tasks. Breakfast is included in the price and is varied each day slightly. My first day trip from Asunción was on the number 11 bus to Uruguay. Less than 20 kilometres, but 2.5 hours on the bus due to the appalling traffic in Asunción. Just before Uruguay is the Cerro Coy, home to a very unusual geological formation found in only 3 other places in the world. Uruguay is famous for its produce. Not fruit and veg, but porcelain, which is what you're looking at right now. It's amazing what you can buy on a bus in Asunción, like this local bread called chipa, made of cassava flour. You also get people singing for a living. Surprising how much they can earn, certainly enough to live on. My next day trip from Asunción was to Tabati, a town dedicated to the small-scale production of bricks and roof tiles. My next trip out from Asunción was to the pleasant little town of Ibiqui to visit the nearby Ibiqui National Park. The drinking of herbal tea, mate, is almost a religion in this part of the world. The customer chooses which herbs he or she wants. And then it's served freezing cold. In Argentina, Uruguay and Brazil, mate is served very, very hot. On the walk into the national park, I spotted something interesting happening on the road. A queen leafcutter ant digging a fresh nest. In the forest beside the road were large numbers of these giant cacti. I was accompanied by Rebecca from the dormitory in my hostel. Like most visitors, we headed straight to the waterfall. Despite the water being surprisingly cold, Rebecca just couldn't resist a swim. Hordes of swallow-tailed butterflies were attracted to the muddy riverbank to drink. These butterflies belong to a family with just a single species in Europe, a handful in North America, and over 1,000 in South America. This is a passion flower butterfly, belonging to a family only found in Central and South America and extreme southern United States. This weird stingless bee nest was on a tree. Look at the strange finger-like projections. Members of the pineapple family were widespread within the forest. And on the tree trunks, the occasional cracker butterfly, very well camouflaged. After 4 days in Ibiqui, we caught the bus back to Asunción. Next day, I spent some time looking at the local sites. This is the elegant old railway station, now disused. The amount of street art in Asunción is very small compared with Montevideo, but nevertheless well worth seeking out. The themes are often local ones. On the way to eat one day, just before I got to the Mercado, I spotted this knife grinder, something I remember from my childhood in Britain, but now long since disappeared, but common here in South America. The Mercado Municipal is where the local workers come for a cheap and cheerful meal. No air conditioning, but the roof fans certainly help. If I wanted something of higher quality, I went to one of the local malls. Food's a lot more expensive, but very tasty. You help yourself, put it on your plate, the plate is weighed, and you pay by weight. With Christmas coming, there was the inevitable Christmas tree. With her return to Switzerland imminent, Rebecca was packing in our dorm. After Christmas dinner in the hostel, I set off next day for Concepcion. After arriving at the bus station in Concepcion, I set off on foot looking for a suitable hotel. I chose this place, with a small single room, cheap but adequate, and a nativity scene in the reception. Exploring Concepcion next day, before it got too hot, I chanced upon this sort of taxi rank for horses and carts. A driver sets off, summoned by his cell phone. On the nearby Rio Paraguay, thousands of mini islands of water hyacinth were floating downstream after heavy rains upstream. On the small quayside, a boat was being loaded to travel upriver, serving the town of Bahia Negra and small places in between. Some of the smaller villages and towns have no road access, so everything has to come by boat and be loaded laboriously by hand. With a temperature over 40 degrees Celsius, the ice cream sellers were doing a roaring trade. At sunset, the whole scene was transformed. "24 hours later, I was crossing the Rio Paraguay, heading from Asunción into Argentina and eventually to Bolivia. In Resistencia, in Argentina, I caught a bus right across the north of the country to Salta. And from Salta, a bus took me way up into the Andes through the spectacular Quebrada de Humahuaca as far as La Quiaca on the border with Bolivia. This was all taken in the pouring rain. This was very much the wet season. For the first time in several weeks, I needed an overcoat and actually felt cold. This is the queue at La Quiaca, heading for Bolivia, and La Quiaca lies at 3,442 metres, more than 11,600 feet.